a warm welcome to Samantha. So take it away. We're really interested in the evening session. So thank you.
Thank you much. So thank you. So yes, we have known each other for a long time. I lived in New Zealand for 12 years. I'm now back in Australia. I've been here for 3 years. I've also lived in London. So I sort of covered my bases, lived in Canada as well. Um, but it was nice to be in New Zealand. I really enjoyed it. That's where I first really started to learn about the Enneagram while I was based there, and found it gave me a depth of understanding about people that really helped me think about what we need in terms of growth and healing. So looking at sort of this multidimensional perspective, which I found really useful. And I think so much of a part of that is about emotions, which is the sort of the reason for the topic tonight, and sort of deep diving into it. I'm going to I'll include sort of a brief background to the Enneagram, but really it's going to be very short. I'm going to assume that all of you have at least a basic understanding of the Enneagram. Is anyone completely new? No Enneagram knowledge? Okay, perfect. That is great. So let me just share my slides. Okay, everyone can see that okay? All
Yes, we
right.
can.
Perfect. So just a little bit about me. I have a background in law and leadership development, organizational development, creativity. I have a strong painting practice, and all of that has really led me into working with business owners who are really stuck on putting their authentic work into the world due to fears of criticism and rejection and judgment. And I find that the Enneagram's somatic, psychological, spiritual approach really helps understand how do we birth and really put the work that really matters to us, that's from essence, not just from ego, into the world. So that's sort of me and how I use the Enneagram after a very long and winding career. So tonight, really, this is a bit of an overview of what we're focusing on. Everyone experiences almost every day these four core emotions of happiness, sadness, fear, and anger. But our ego structure limits or masks our awareness of them. Now, our ego thinks that's a great idea, but even though we're not aware that we're experiencing, we are still unconsciously acting them out. And that creates confusion, miscommunication, and tension within ourselves, within our relationships, within our communities, in our work, that doesn't necessarily need to be there. And so we're going to aim to just get a little more aware of what the emotions are for, and how we can start to access them a bit more. So here's our plan for tonight. We're going to do a brief review of the Enneagram Personality's 9 operating strategies. We'll take a look at why the 4 core emotions matter, even when our ego thinks we shouldn't pay attention to them. We'll take a brief look at the emotional profile of each Enneagram type. So how easy or hard is it for each type to access each of the 4 emotions? And then just some practices that you could apply to help access the emotions that your type potentially overlooks. Okay, brief review of the Enneagram. This is the Enneagram symbol. The circle represents wholeness, both the fact we are already whole and complete, and we're also on a journey back to wholeness, into remembering our own wholeness and bringing unity to the multiplicity within us. The triangle represents change and transformation, and the hexad, which is the other shape, represents a process by which creation and destruction and change and transformation happens. All of that often is referred to as the process Enneagram. In the Enneagram of personality, those 9 points each represent a way in which we disconnect from that sense of wholeness and forget parts of ourselves. And each point reminds us of a pathway we can take to reconnect to that wholeness and remember all parts of ourselves. And so the purpose of this session is to see some of the emotions that we forget, that our ego blocks out, remember why they're important, and to remember how we can start to access them and use them in our lives, and the information and the insight they bring us. Now, each point from a personality perspective represents a core survival or operating strategy. This is built into our ego, but then also shaped from our life experiences. So everyone is unique because we've all grown up in different families, in different countries. We've had different life experiences as children. And so we express these all very differently. But at the heart of it, each one of us is striving to achieve one of these things. So ones are striving to feel perfect. Twos are striving to feel connected. Threes are striving to feel outstanding. For fours, it's unique. For fives, it's detached. For six, it's secure. For sevens, it's excited. Eight's powerful. And nine's peaceful. And you notice here, the phrase I've used is striving to feel. And this is where we see this false promise within the ego structure, because the ego is promising us that if we strive hard enough to feel connected and outstanding and unique, we will feel a sense of longing, a sense of belonging or feeling loved or valued. And it's that belief that when we achieve that, we'll feel this sense of inner peace. But we can never actually fully achieve what the ego has us striving for. And so we never can really achieve this sense of inner peace or this time to relax and enjoy ourselves by following this strategy. And so part of the work or the growth work that the Enneagram invites us to is to go, well, what's on this other side of this equation? What are we not remembering about ourselves when we're just striving to feel this one thing or experience this one thing? So from an emotions perspective, when we're striving, we're more reactive. We have limited access to each of the emotions. We act out hidden emotions, and we can use emotions defensively because we see them as good or bad, or our ego sees them as good or bad. When we're more present, we can be more responsive. We can accept all of our emotions. They're neither good nor bad. And we don't have to, I can't see what I've written there. We don't have to express them. We can hold them lightly, sense the information they're giving us, and then process them accordingly. Now, one way in which we act them out without realizing it, I just want to use this from the perspective of the centers of intelligence. So when body types, eights, nines, and ones, experience something, when their ego experiences something that it doesn't feel is okay or right, that it wants to move on very quickly, it often uses a sense of anger to control the environment around them in some way. That can be imposing order or structure, taking charge about something, enforcing a routine, but it's trying to block out what it doesn't want to be aware of by controlling the environment. Similarly, for heart types, twos, threes, and fours, when they experience a sense of sadness or grief at loss, they go into action to try and feel more connected to other people in some way. And for head types, fives, sixes, or sevens, when they feel this experience fear about the future being uncertain, they go into planning, research, or analysis mode in order to try and feel a sense of safety. And that is one way in which the emotions we're not aware of leads us to take action that we don't necessarily need to take. Because sometimes we don't need to plan for the future. Sometimes we don't need to control our environment. And sometimes we don't need to connect into our relationships to feel and process the emotion within. Okay, any questions about the Enneagram perspective before I move into the core emotions? I can't see everyone, so you might just have to use the little raise hand button at the bottom. Oh, okay.
I'm just curious, Samantha, which type are you?
Oh, I'm a type 7.
Oh, okay.
So I give a lot more examples about sevens, but I do my best with all the types. Okay, the purpose of the 4 core emotions. Now, if anyone's watched Inside Out, you will know that these are characters from that movie, and I love that they can help us really explore this topic. So we've got anger, fear, sadness, and joy or happiness. So what's the purpose of anger? Because many of us live in a society that gives us the message that expressing anger is bad, or we perceive anger as rage. But anger, when we're authentically experiencing it, is simply communicating with us that something is no longer of service or it's out of alignment, that there is a boundary or a value that is being crossed or needs to be reinforced in some way, or it's just time to say no to something, to stop a routine, to let something go, that's time for something to end so something new can take its place. So it's a place of creation and destruction. But we often see anger too much about destruction and not enough about creation, and they always go hand in hand. So anger helps us stand up for ourselves and others. It helps us maintain boundaries, eliminate old beliefs and worldviews, and stop processes and projects that no longer need to be carried on. The problem is, anger doesn't need to be loud or aggressive. Anger can be extremely quiet, because anger, when we're experiencing more authentically, it simply feels just like a commitment or a strength inside our bodies just to stand our ground in some way. When we perceive anger as rage, rage is often anger that's either fueled by fear or sadness or other unprocessed emotions or childhood wounds or trauma that means that it's very difficult for that person to channel the anger in a healthy way. And so it's important that when we want to express anger as rage, to find ways to consider, how can I express this more, channel this first before using the anger to take the step it's inviting me to take. And so I have a reflection question for you all, and we've got 4 of these. Over the last week, recall one situation where you felt angry. And this could range from feeling furious or irritated or frustrated, all the way down to just tense or peeved or cynical or critical. It doesn't have to be intense anger, which might be your first thought. A lot of people think, oh, I didn't experience any anger this week because I didn't get rageful. But simply just being annoyed at something is a sign of anger. So just take a minute just to make a note of the first sort of memory or thought that pops into mind about sometime recently when you experienced some level of anger. Okay, so let's move on to sadness. Sadness or grief at loss arises when we lose something that matters to us. I know a lot of the times we associate grief with the death of a loved one, but we actually experience a lot of loss on a regular basis, because loss simply follows change and our lives are always changing. So we can grieve or feel a sense of loss at the end of the season. I know I certainly am, having to figure out what to wear for spring. I'm like, oh, I just got a handle on winter. But these losses can be tangible or intangible. So if your car is stolen, that's a tangible loss. But the intangible loss would be grieving memories you had of good times in that vehicle, or grieving the plans you're planning on using to drive somewhere, or a trip you're planning to take in the car. And we have a lot more intangible losses on a regular basis than I think we truly realize. So sadness is simply letting us know it's time to say goodbye to something, time to let something go, to move on. But it also helps us understand what we value, what matters to us, what we care about, and what we like and dislike. So sadness plays a really important part in our daily lives. It's not just about our relationships to other people, but it's about relationships to objects, to the past, to the future, and a whole range of things in between. So my next question is, when was a time recently you felt sadness? That could have been intense grief, devastation, or being really discouraged. Could just simply be disappointed or apathetic, unhappy, bored, or lonely. Just take a minute to jot down the first thing that comes to mind. And no stress if it's hard for something to come up. Make a note of that too. Okay, so now we will move on to fear. So fear arises when we are uncertain about the future or don't feel in control of the situation. So there is a place where fear is about sensing danger, and it's about keeping us safe and going into that fight, flight, or freeze response. But it can also just be an emotion that lets us know when we need some more information about something, when we need to do a little bit of research to get some information, something's missing in the equation. Now, we can experience actual threats and fear that is activated from there being a tiger in the room, the proverbial tiger, and actual danger in front of us. But often, most often, the fear we experience is anxiety created from the stories we're telling ourselves, mental pictures and scenarios that we generate ourselves that creates this anxiety for ourselves. So, what is a recent situation where you felt some level of fear? That could be panicked, alarmed, anxious, or stressed, or just simply guarded, cautious, wary, or worried.
Samantha, can you pop back to that last slide?
Sure.
Thanks.
Let's see if I can. There we go.
I was just like wanting to pick up on what's the good bits about it.
An indication that more information is needed.
Right, thank you.
And then happiness. So happiness indicates that our needs are being met, that it's time to celebrate, congratulate, have a bit of a laugh, to enjoy the moment. It invites us to give appreciation or positive feedback to others, to take the time to appreciate ourselves, to be grateful for what we have and what's around us. And often it means we can be a little bit more playful, a bit more relaxed, a bit more optimistic about things. I also just want to note here that we live in a time where happiness is seen as a good emotion, and anger and sadness and fear can be seen as bad emotions. But from an ego perspective, they're all equal. They all can be good or bad because we can use all of them defensively to protect or hide us from being aware of other emotions as well. And the 7 is particularly good at that with happiness, which we'll talk about later. So what's something in the last week that made you happy? That could have been delight and joyful, or just to be proud, to be calm or carefree or relaxed. Just make a note of a memory that arises. Okay, now the last one's a little tricky. This is reflection on the reflection exercise we just did. So of those 4 questions I just asked you, on anger, fear, sadness, and happiness, recall a memory. Which of those emotions was it easiest to recall a memory of? So when I did this earlier today, fear was the easiest one that was easiest to recall, but I struggled to think of anything for anger or sadness, for example. It's you're just observing your own process. And then which was the hardest to bring to mind? Anyone confused? Has a question? Can be a bit tricky, this one.
Mm.
Anyone confused? Has a question? Can be a bit tricky, this one.
Mm.
Anyone confused? Has a question? Can be a bit tricky, this one.
Mm.
Anyone confused? Has a question? Can be a bit tricky, this one. Anyone confused? Has a question? Can be a bit tricky, this one. I'm going to move into the profiles shortly.
I actually have
Elizabeth,
a question here.
Yes.
Because a lot of people they suppress their emotion in different way, so that can affect, yeah, what is the easiest to recall and the hardest to recall. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes. That's the point of the exercise, is to almost give a sense of, in this moment, which was easiest for you to access. And if you drew a blank, that was a hard one to access. And then we can compare that to the different types as we go through. That's just a little way for you to compare as we review the profiles to see what might be true for you. Makes sense. Okay. Elizabeth?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Amazing. So what I notice is they have very different, so what I would experience as shapes, and they have very different tone as well. So anger is very, but that might be just the week I've had, whereas the others have different shapes and tones to them. So it's not necessarily about hard or easier, if that makes sense. They just feel really different.
Well, that's a good observation as well, but it sounds like all four came easily. There was a sense that you didn't draw a blank on any of them.
No, but I know a time in my life where I would have. So
yeah, that's good observation. All right, anyone else? Okay, so we're going to move into the patterns next, and as I'm going to go through the body types first, so 8, 9, and 1, and then we'll do a breakout group to discuss anger. Then I'm going to go through the heart types. We'll do a breakout group to discuss sadness, and the head types, and we'll do one final breakout group along the way. How many people do we have? 12. Okay, perfect. Okay. All right, so right, mate. Now, can you guys see the slides well enough? I didn't. No problem. Okay. So 8s strive to feel powerful. So that's the ego structure of the 8. So emotions like sadness and fear don't often allow us to feel powerful. Anger is obviously something that generally helps us feel stronger, because when we're angry, we can be right, we can be in justice mode, we can have vengeance. It allows us to take charge quickly and create a sense of control within ourselves and the environment around us. So for 8s, when they're experiencing sadness and fear, it gets quickly replaced with anger. Now, that doesn't have to be anger in terms of being loud or aggressive. It can simply just be an intensity, speaking directly, taking charge about something. It doesn't have to be explosive. That's what I'm trying to communicate there. 8s also have easy access to happiness, because happiness just doesn't generally feel vulnerable. It's something that's an okay space to hang out on, and it doesn't necessarily ask a lot of us from a vulnerability perspective. And so that's sort of what 8s, that's the emotions that 8s find easy to access and use, and the ones they struggle to be more aware of. Now, 9s strive to feel peaceful. So 9s tend to numb all of their emotions out a bit, because they want to feel peaceful inside and outside. And so while a 9 will appear warm and friendly, it's not necessarily coming from an emotional place per se. It's coming from part of the ego structure and the way it creates a sense of peacefulness within themselves and around them. Now, they do have, even though they go to sleep to their anger, they have a little more access to it, because it gets expressed as stubbornness, passive aggressiveness, passive resistance. And so that can look like sort of smiling or nodding and indicating they're on board with something, even when they're not. It can mean they're going with the flow, but you notice they're dragging their feet because they're not fully on board with it. But they're not necessarily aware that that's anger being expressed unconsciously for them.
A question here. So they for type 9, they access anger easier than the other 3 emotions, and the other 3 emotion is equally difficult to access.
all of their nine's emotions are difficult to access, but they use anger a little bit more, even unconsciously, to try as a way to sort of maintain a sense of control over the environment. So the nines want to be peaceful internally and externally. So sadness and fear, even happiness, can upset that internal equilibrium, because all of those emotions can be intense, right? So all of them sort of get downplayed a bit. They express anger more, but they're not aware they're expressing anger more. They can explode if they're being pushed too far or they really struggle. Nines can have a little volcano moment. It's intense anger that pops up, but then they feel really guilty and worried about it, so it sort of goes straight back down again. So it's a little more on the anger than the others, but I don't want to give you the impression they easily access it. They do forget that it's there.
Okay.
And then for type ones, striving to feel perfect, all of their emotions get filtered through the lens of what is appropriate or correct for the situation, which means emotions often get converted into something else that's appropriate. So I put a box around anger here to represent that anger is very contained. The anger is held very tight within the body. So ones often have tight muscles or a tight jaw because the anger is being held in, but it is there. And so when they experience a situation and the anger is present, but expressing anger is inappropriate, it could just as easily get converted into politeness, or a critique, or some sort of comment about the situation, even if they're angry at the time. Now, they tend not to experience happiness because that would require them to relax that anger response. And sadness and fear can feel quite vulnerable in those moments. It requires slowing down and taking the eye off things being sort of perfect or correct. And so those can be held quite closely, and they may not really be aware that they're there. But how ones express their frustration or inner anger really depends on the situation they're in and what feels appropriate or inappropriate for that situation. So it can come across differently for that. So we've got three styles in the way people react to their anger. It can be very expressive, it can be something we go to sleep to, or it can be something that's held in and contained. That's sort of three archetypal ways that anger is expressed. So regardless of your type, you might find yourself relating to one of those forms of anger. But we're now going to head out into breakout groups for you guys to discuss this. What's anger like for you, regardless of your type? Is it easy or hard to access or release? Is it quiet or loud? What does it look like? What situations does it pop up in? So I'm just going to set breakout groups. Oh, there it is. Breakout rooms, here we go. Breakout. Let's have a look.
Excellent, thanks.
So anyone want to share something from their discussion about anger that stood out?
We were sort of saying that it looks so different. Anger can, when you mention the other things that anger could look like it could be disappointment, then that kind of anger I can experience quite a lot. But anger, as in, what you would typically think of anger is not something, I'm not an 8, 9 or a 1, so, it's not something that's top of the field for me. But other words for it, like intense or that passive anger or contained anger. Certainly I know people with those 8, 9, 1 Enneagram numbers who could be described as being passive and contained, which is actually quite a difficult anger for you to communicate with. As somebody who likes to communicate, I find that intense or passive anger quite tricky.
Yeah. And also we don't always we're regularly irritated or frustrated, we don't necessarily connect to that as being anger, and that might be an indication that a value is being crossed or something needs to stop in some way, because they just feel like small emotions that we can set aside. That's a really good observation, that anger can look different in so many different forms.
Mm.
Anyone else? Insights about anger?
I think it's been a helpful reminder that anger isn't, that obviously rage is related to anger, but it's not the same thing. And I think I tend to, as a 9, I think I tend to only recognize anger when it seems like it's going to turn into rage. And then it's quite scary, because you're kind of like, you're aware of losing control at that point, and you're not quite sure what's going to happen. Quite rare, but so it's helpful to see that energy as something much more common and, as it were, lower level, much more attached to normal life and normal existence, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and you might have discovered this already, but 9s really benefit from connecting to their anger more regularly, and they find those bigger moments don't, it doesn't build
One thing
up.
that came out in, I was chatting with Gail, and one thing that came out there was the fact that I actually would very rarely say I am angry, because I wouldn't have that degree of consciousness of it as an anger until I was scared it was going to turn into rage, and then it's too late, kind of thing. So interesting.
Yeah.
My comment, Samantha, was how it's quite hard to think of it in its pure form, anger. And I was sharing in our group how, if you take the top 2 emotions, for me here it would be anger and sadness, and both of those look very different from anger and joy, or anger and fear. So I think, there's a way of trying to recognize it, and it's pure, because I mean, for me, anger is not something I now experience in my everyday life very much at all, because I'm not triggered by things, because let's say grandchildren and whatever take the edge off things, so the joy comes easy, etc.
Yeah.
But I think that, thinking of it in terms of the top 2 in each of those helps me a lot with thinking it through.
I think it took time for me to understand that anger can just be something that's like, no, I don't want that anymore. It doesn't have to be, which is how I used to experience a lot of it. But that was simply because it was fueled by fear, and I didn't know that.
It's a maturing thing, isn't it, to be able to say no, I think.
Yeah. And no in a way that creates and destroys at the same time. It allows a new paradigm to form that respects everyone involved.
I think I experience a lot of joy around it now, and a lot of playfulness. I can put my foot down, I can have a good old tantrum. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And it becomes, I was talking in the group about it being a source of joy and playfulness for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I agree,
Yeah,
actually,
like
Liz. I think there's something that I've grown into, is just going, actually, no. I don't think I had it for decades, but it sort of arrived.
So think about that for a moment.
Much to the surprise of quite a few people around me.
All right, thank you for all that. It was good anger discussion. Let's move on to the heart types. And this centers around sadness as the whole of the key emotion here, but we'll look at all of them. So 2s strive to feel connected. And twos on the whole are the most emotionally expressive type on the Enneagram, but they tend to preference like expressing happiness because there's a fear, there's this belief that the ego structure has that expressing anger, fear, and sadness will make them unlikable. So they might experience all those emotions, but there's also some repression going on as well. So twos more generally access and express happiness. They also experience a lot of sadness from a moment where there's a sense that there is some sort of disconnection happening in the relationships of people who are important to them. And that can get expressed in different ways. Anger can come up quickly for twos in two situations. One where there's a sense that being angry is a quick way to reconnect a relationship, or when there's a sense that their needs are not being met and they want someone to meet them. And then fear is very specific for twos. It's about fear, bad things that might happen to loved ones. So worrying that someone might be injured for something that may or may not happen. I'll check I think I covered most of what I want to say about twos. Twos tend to cry a lot, but generally in private rather than in public. But there is a sense of just expressing things that will be liked. So happy people like happy people. And so that's why the two ego structure tends to focus on that space first. Now, threes strive to feel outstanding, which means they tend to have this focus on achievement, getting things done, getting awards, looking good, being very productive. Now, threes have a lot of sadness, but they push it aside in order to stay busy, because there's a sense that if they get into that sadness, it will slow them down and it'll stop them feeling outstanding or achieving those awards or looking good in some way. But if you spend time, if you look into a three's eyes, you can really see that sadness really deeply held there, but they don't readily express it. Now, for anger, can be very easily, quickly used as a way to deal with obstacles or anything that's very quickly in the way of achieving the goal that's in front of them. And that's when you see that anger or irritation come out quickly. They can have fear in terms of achieving a goal, and fear or anxiety of failure that can be there. And happiness, threes don't have a problem with being happy, because we live in a society that sees happiness as successful. But also if they're achieving those awards and things are going to plan, there's no reason for them to be anything else but happy, which is why I've presented them all as equal here. Because it can be situational dependent, but the sadness is extremely hard for them to connect with and express, even though it's quite there for them. Now, that brings us to type 4. Type 4 strive to feel unique or to feel understood. Now, in general, they experience or feel sadness a lot more than the other types, but there are three very different flavors of 4s that change what this sort of picture I have here would look like. So the stereotypical 4 holds on to their sadness, really experiences sadness, dwells in their sadness. And this is the kind of 4 who will communicate with you a lot about what they're lacking, what they feel sad about, what's missing. There'll be an air of melancholy to them. There is another flavor of 4 that experiences that sadness but holds it tightly within them, and instead will potentially look happy because they turn that sadness into action, how they go out and get what they feel is lacking. And so that's more of a stoic 4. And then the last 4 is the angry 4. So they take that sadness or fear of what they're lacking and turn it into anger. They demand their needs get met. They demand that they're special. There's a demandingness that goes along with it there. And so for that type of 4, anger is more easy to access, but all of it is driven around the sadness. Sadness is held onto and deeply felt, but there's 3 different ways of expressing that within this ego structure. In general, 4s struggle to feel happy because they're holding on so tightly to that sadness. It can be quite an important practice for fours to journal and practice and remember what to be grateful for and what's present and going well in the moment. So that is sadness. And so we're going to do breakout groups again, probably different groups this time. Ah, yes.
Can you go back to type 2 slide?
Sure. See if I can do that easily. There we go. Yep.
Yeah. So I am type 1 ring with type 2. Then it's an average out between these two graphs?
So you're a type 1 or type 2?
Type 1 ring with type 2.
Okay, so the wing indicates an extra, it's not a subtype, it's seeking extra resources to cope with stress in a situation, or there's some growth work that's been done around that. So from an emotional perspective, the focus would still be on the type 1 patterns, driven by that need for perfection rather than to striving for connection.
Okay, so then that means that type 2, this emotional pattern not influence my type 1 emotional pattern?
No, not it would be more for the type 1, it would be more reflective of the whether it was a self-preservation one, because they're more anxious. The social one is more certain, and the sexual one is more angry. So it's more a combination of the dominant instinct that reflects what the emotions look like within the set of ones themselves, rather than the wings.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Is that the same with all the types then, that the subtype thing will influence how the emotion is expressed? So
Yes, because the
flavors of each one.
self-preservation instinct is more anxious. The sexual instinct has easier access to anger or intensity. And the social instinct tends to be a bit cooler, a little more intellectual. So that can shape how that gets expressed, but the emotions aren't always as easily expressed with the social dominant. It's a bit of a mixed bag there.
Yeah.
But yes, it's how the dominant instinct brings to the emotional pattern that really shapes the flavor of it.
Thank you.
So sadness. What was, as we talked about, whether it was comfortable or uncomfortable or different ways we process it, what stood out? What came up for you?
I put my hand up artificially, except I can't find it anymore on Zoom. I seem to have lost where to put your hand up.
That's fine. I can see you. Thank goodness.
So I don't know much about Enneagram, but in our group, we had 2 people with feeling preferences and 2 people with thinking preferences. And what stood out for me was that and I am paraphrasing and stereotyping a little bit here, but the 2 people, so please correct me, the other people in my group, the 2 people who had feeling preferences talk more about perhaps experiencing quite a lot of sadness or wallowing in it, or it feeling soft. And the 2 people with thinking preferences, of whom I was one, we both said we don't often feel sad. Maybe that's because we're repressing it, I don't know. But one thing that was common to all of us was, loss of connection with people troubles us and that's a situation that makes us feel sad, when you lose connection with other people for whatever reason. So I hope that's
a really good observation.
Summary of the group I was in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Catherine.
I'll come in. We had an interesting discussion in our group. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, so I definitely am aware of the melancholy. I enjoy movies that are melancholic, books, etc. And yes, I recognize it easily in myself. But one thing I learned from Jerry in our group was about saying the words "I feel sad." I could probably say "I feel angry," and I don't like to say that, but it's very I feel very vulnerable if I was to say to someone "I feel sad," because it's such a huge emotion for me, and I'm an INFJ, so very private. I think to receive the sympathy from another person, it would just start me crying. So 9 times out of 10, I probably wouldn't say that because it just puts me in a vulnerable position to actually feel even more sadness.
It's a really interesting observation, Gail. Yeah. How intense it is, but that even letting people know increases the sadness.
Well, it
Yeah.
allows the space to be expressed. So it's fine if I'm with someone that I trust and know well, but I think there's an inner part of me that doesn't do it often because I'm fine. I can express my sadness alone quite easily. I do it often, and it's really healthy. I really believe that's important to get grief and loss out of the body. So it's a natural process for me.
Lovely. I have to say, I have to psych myself up to watch sad movies. So I'm glad you shared that that's something that's easy for you.
I have to say it's quite different for me. You know, I try and avoid sadness as much as I possibly can. And we were talking in our group, you know, one of us was a 4, and that sort of almost enjoyment of wallowing in sadness was something that the 4 in our group said existed. But it's, you know, I would distract myself from it. I would definitely, you know, I certainly can't say that I don't get, you know, I get sad quite a bit, but I will purposely distract myself from it to try and like pick myself up or not show it, or, you know, try and hide the fact that I've got tissues in my pocket or whatever it is. Yeah. I wish I was better at it, actually. I think it's quite a gift to be able to be good at being sad.
I'm struck by how the concept of sadness seems to have a predominantly negative overtone to it, and I see quite a positive thing of sadness, as Jerry and I were saying in our group. You know, that sort of somehow there's something much more meaningful when you. We talked about music, Leonard Cohen versus ABBA or something, you know, and both are great.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but the sadness where it touches something very profound, and rather than separation, for me it feels like connection with, you know, the nature of the human condition, you know, because we're all going to experience it, we're all going to feel, we're all going to lose our mum, our dad, our children, whatever, and so yes, I mean, for me there's something about recognizing the value and positiveness of it rather than just all negative and avoiding it.
I think it's difficult where we live in a time where we're disconnected from grieving rituals associated with death, which means we're more disconnected from just grieving generally. I know I certainly had to learn how to grieve, which I'd never really known before. And it's so, I think it's an important thing to learn how to do. Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks, Roy. Thanks, Sue. All right. Anyone else before we head over into fear? Okay.
Maybe one more question. Sometimes same event, same situation. Some people respond with sadness, some people respond with anger. So from your point of view, is it because they have different Enneagram type, and what other factors are affecting them?
It's a very there's no simple answer to that, because each person's response is a mix of life experience, cultural norms, Enneagram type, unprocessed wounds, trauma. Like, we're a whole mix of things, and you know, it's hard to say, you know, why one person would respond with one emotion and someone from another, because there's a whole range of things that will be influencing that. Someone could have had a family in which emotional expression was supported and someone else didn't. It can all, varied.
Okay, yeah. So I think so too. Yeah, it's a range of parameters.
Okay. All right. Does that answer your question for now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Fear. Okay, so type 5 strives to feel detached. So here is another type, which you could almost say this is the least emotional type on the Enneagram, but they're not numbing these emotions out, they're detaching from it. So it's a bit of a different process. So they can be quite disconnected, not just from their feelings, but also from their body. And our body is where we experience the sensations of feelings. And so that's where that disconnection, that detachment contributes to the situation. Now, their fear, because it probably should be stronger, I should have a bigger fear box here, but the fear is acted out in different ways. So the 5 acts out fear by trying to control their schedule, their energy, people they spend time with, the situations they go into. That's how they use fear to control the environment and to stay feeling detached. They also use compartmentalization of feelings. They don't like to experience emotional overwhelm when other people are around. So those emotions will get boxed up and wait until they feel they're in a situation where it's okay to open that box up and process what's in there. But they will generally be alone and know exactly sort of how much time they have in order to undertake that process. So fear is predominant overall, but I think the other thing to say here for 5s is they try not to access sadness very much, because sadness invites connection with people. If they appear sad to others, it invites people to come in and go, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? And that can feel intrusive to a 5. But the thing that's really important to remember about 5s is from the outside, they can look like they don't want connection, like it's not important to them because they can appear aloof and distant. But 5s are highly sensitive to connection and to someone moving away. They just need to know the distance someone's going to be from them, a distance that feels safe and manageable and won't be overwhelming. So if you're in a coaching session or a meeting with a 5, you'll notice that they'll move their chair to the right amount of distance. So if you're up here on the screen, they just might move back here because that's the distance that feels right, like safe and not overwhelming to them. And so that's one way in which they manage that. Now, 6 is another mixed bag, just like the 4s. Here, there is a lot of fear. The 6s aren't necessarily aware of that. It can feel just more like anxiety. It can take time for them to recognize that that fear is there. So 6s strive to feel secure, but there are 3 different ways in which they react to this fear. So the first type of 6, the self-preservation 6, appears very fearful. They can be very doubting and questioning and uncertain about things that are going on. And they try and resolve that fear by building friendships and relationships for protection. The social 6 seeks rules to follow in order to feel certain. So they can look quite rigid, intellectual, and tend not to look fearful at all. And they're one of the least emotional types on the Enneagram, the social 6. The sexual 6 uses anger to go on the offensive, to almost like they have the fight response. That's the counterphobic 6, if you're familiar with that term. It's the, how do I deal with threats before they come to me? How do I attack first? And so the anger isn't authentic anger. It's an anger reaction fueled by fear that's happening there. Happiness is difficult for 6s to access because that requires relaxing the fear response. And this strategy always has them looking for what threats or worries or things that might go wrong or things that might not go to plan. They're always scanning the environment for that. And so to access that happiness, there is a need to sort of relax that scanning that 6s are often doing. They can appear sad, but often it's more fear, crying with fear rather than crying with sadness, if that makes sense. It's the fear can take on many different expressions. That's what I'm trying to say there. And 7s. So 7s are striving to feel excited. And the only emotion that truly feels excited all the time is happiness. And so sevens often look optimistic, positive, regularly telling you they're fine, there's no problem, what a lovely day it is. But underneath, what isn't obvious to non-sevens is that things can be quite dark inside their world. So I think this is one of the misconceptions about sevens is they're happy on the outside and the inside, and that's not the case at all. Sevens can experience a lot of depression, just as the other types, but even more so for the sevens because they're very aware of what doesn't feel good and how hard they're working to avoid that. That doesn't mean a depressed seven will be able to tell you that they're depressed. They might still tell you they're fine, but I just want to point out that the happiness isn't always on the inside as much as what you might be seeing on the outside. They have a lot of fear. They're not necessarily aware that that fear is there, but that is what fuels that quick action to consume lots of things, to go out and do lots of fun things really quickly. Sadness, they try to avoid because it feels like they'll be stuck in it forever. And they have to learn that it's fleeting. It doesn't have to be permanent. And anger, it's actually really hard for them to access in its authentic form. That took me a long time to understand because sevens don't like conflict, and anger can feel very intense and it can feel like they're not really in control. And so anger is something they have to form a new relationship with. Yeah. So for our last discussion group, we're going to do fear and happiness at the same time. So you might want to...
Discussion, I have a question. Can you go back to the type 7?
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned type 7 doesn't like conflict, so the anger is the least. But type 9 also doesn't like conflict, but for them the anger is more higher, much higher.
Well, it's a different relationship. So no type likes conflict. Even 8s will tell you they don't like conflict. It's easier for them to move towards confrontation. So every type has a different relationship with conflict, and in some ways no one likes it, but they're avoiding it for different reasons. So the 7 in a situation where there might be conflict will use charm and happiness as a defense to try and diffuse that situation, where a 9 will go with the flow and be very mellow and friendly without expressing their preferences. The 7 might still express what their preference is, but they'll charm the other person into going their way, whereas the 9 will acquiesce to what someone else wants, even if they don't want that. So it's 2 different strategies for dealing with conflict. And each type has their own strategy for dealing with conflict.
Yes, I understand your explanation, but the second part of the question is about the anger, because for 9, the anger is much higher.
In my box, it was higher, but that there weren't comparative between the types. That was just within the type structure itself. In my diagram for 9s, the anger was larger to represent that they have a bigger relationship with anger, but not that it's easier to express than other types.
Okay.
So these are not scientifically measured graphs. They are my best guess to represent the relationship to the emotions within each type, rather than as a comparative across all types. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I feel like my size was confusing. I apologize for that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. Right, so we'll talk about fear. Just mention some of the things you're afraid of. It's very different for each type. The 6 has a more global fear. There is a sense of, being afraid of a lot of different things. Whereas for the other 8 types, they're afraid of very specific things. That's one of the ways that we can tell the difference between the types is what is it we're actually afraid of? What's the thing that scares us the most? And happiness, how do you know when you're happy? Is it easy or hard for you to access? And how do you celebrate? So just a couple of things to discuss in your groups. Just get our breakout groups back up. All right, and we'll have another 7 minutes. All right, here we go. So I still would like to take just a few minutes to just hear what those discussions about fear and happiness were before we wrap up. Anything really stand out or feel interesting or intriguing from your conversations?
Well, we didn't get to happy.
No time for that. No time.
See, I could see my fear channeled through the 5 in terms of its fear of the nasty external world mostly. And Catherine was similar in that as a 5. So that wanting to detach from it because it's all scary.
Mm,
Yeah.
good observation. Yeah.
We did
And
talk
to see
about
that it's a little bit more
Sorry.
present for you. No, it's all right. You go, Catherine.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we did talk in our group about happiness a little bit and touched on, you know, you feel happy when you haven't got anything to worry about and you're peaceful. And I think we all felt we did know when we were happy, and we feel emotions when we are happy. I think that's what we said.
Good one.
Thank you for the questions. I thought they were quite thought-provoking. How do you know when you're happy? Yeah, thank you very much. We didn't have time to really delve into those either, but yeah, they're good food for thought.
Well, I mean, as a 7, it can be hard to know when I'm happy if happy is the default. Like, is this real happiness, or is just the veneer of happiness? I personally can find that difficult at times. So yeah, it's an interesting one to ponder.
Samantha,
Right,
what did
I'll
you
just show
say
you.
about about 7s? I was just interested in 7s using charm to diffuse things. Do they use charm
So
to diffuse their fear? Or did I?
no, it's a way of controlling the situation if something might be uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
7s are very good at talking their way out of things or rationalizing to not have to feel discomfort.
Yeah.
Whether that's for themselves and their sadness, or with other people who want to limit them.
I don't know if I'd call it charm, or maybe it is, but I know a lot of 7s, when things aren't so good, will suddenly sort of like distract with humor or do something funny, or, you know, which can be sort of charming. Charming is always a
I
watchword.
think it can depend on the 7 and the situation. But
Yeah.
that's how I ended up in law, because everyone thought I was so great at arguing, and I actually just hated the confrontational aspect of being a lawyer. Anxious all the time. So I know we're over time. I'll just take a couple more minutes, but feel free to leave if you have to. I totally understand. I will just quickly show you one last slide. You can always skip the rest. Just ways of accessing the other emotions. So with anger, just go hit something. So there are times when we're aware that there's anger there and we need ways to bring it out, and there's times when we're not aware it's there. So when we're aware that there's a spark of anger or frustration, we can allow ourselves to fully process it by hitting something, by screaming into a pillow, throwing things, like stomping on the floor, you know, getting your inner dinosaur going. I do that a lot with the kids. But just a way to process it physically, to let it through the body. But it can also be a time to ask yourself what needs to stop, what boundaries need to change. For sadness and grieving, develop grieving practices. Allow yourself, figure out ways that you can grieve, and create space for that. Create your own grieving rituals, but also just ask yourself, what's changed recently? What in my life has changed? What might I have lost, tangible or intangible, that I need to actually spend time grieving? For fear, you can experience fear by listening to scary music or watching a horror movie, both of which I refuse to do. But it's a time when you can just go, what information am I missing? And also spend time passing out with the fear, what's real and what's imagined. And usually the bit that's real is a lot smaller than the bits that's imagined. Happiness, learn to sense when your needs are being met. Sometimes we can quickly overlook that. Practice relaxing, physically relaxing the body. Notice when it's a good time to appreciate other people. While the heart types often give appreciation more easily than the others, for all the other 6 types, it can be of benefit to notice when to give appreciation, when to celebrate success. And gratitude journaling can be a great way to go, what's going well in my life right now, even if a whole lot of things don't feel great. What is going well? Because there's always something that's going well. I will skip that bit. But really, it's just the more we can become aware of all of these emotions, just the more we can communicate more effectively, listen more openly, and increases our compassion for ourselves and others, and reduces misunderstandings and tension and angst and conflict. Now, I will just say there is tons of Enneagram resources out there, but if you're interested in some of the ones I've got on my website, I've got a mistyping guide and a subtype starter kit and some interviews on creativity. So you just head over to my website, samanthamackay.com, and you can find links to those various things. Right, so I will stop sharing. That is what I have for tonight. Thank you for sticking around for a little extra few minutes. I'm happy to stay here and chat further. If anyone needs to go, obviously, don't let me hold you up, but I'm here to answer questions, or we can discuss anything that's come up tonight or about the Enneagram in general.
Yes,
Thank you,
I have a question.
I'll just shut the recording down now, if that's okay. But Samantha, thank you so much for that. That was really an insightful session, and it's just reminded me to be more aware of my emotions and what I'm feeling when, and to name them, and to certainly feel good about some of them that I might try to avoid. So thank you for that. That's been a terrific session. So I'll stop recording now, but yeah, it's been great to hear you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.